I just wanted to kind of recap on what we've done so far. So we've basically gone ahead and prepped things, reduced the track count, made it more manageable, and set it out in a way that makes sense to me. And we've gone ahead and we've listened to the whole tune, and we've done something really important here. Okay, we've not only assessed what sort of music it is, but also what the sort of journey of the track is. And you may have noticed that when I mentioned about this part at the end here where all these backing vocals are, we've got a crescendo, so we need to feel that. So I've made a plan of not only the style of music and what the expectations are, but also, what are the important parts, what's the song's journey. And we also inspected the tracks while this was all happening, and we had this listen through, and I worked out, well, what are the areas that need improvement, what are the areas that need emphasis, and I've basically put a plan in place. And usually when I'm working on a mix, I'm not starting in a very linear way and going, okay, well, now I solo the kick drum, work on that, then start with the snare drum and go all the way through left to right here and end up with the finished track at the end. It's not really like that. So how I usually work is a little bit more like how you might imagine a sculptor working. You've got this big rock, and you need to start knocking huge chunks of it out to get the overall shape that you want first, and then you start really fine-tuning. And I think that mixing is a lot like that, and it's a very kind of jumpy process generally, and it's not like you start one thing, you perfect it, and you move on. It's more that you're getting things roughly in place, and you're getting things so that it resembles what you want, and then you start fine-tuning. So that's really what we're going to be doing. We're going to go and we're going to first set out some routing that is good for me, and we're going to then start handling the big things and the most important things, and then get into the minutiae from there. Okay, so I've set up a really, really simple routing structure here where we've got auxiliaries for the main instrument groups, and what they're going to do is they're just going to feed into a main mix. Okay. And I'm also going to create like an overall mix parallel as well, and that's going to be on all the instruments on ascend. Now I'm not going to do anything with that for the moment, but it's just going to be there in case we need it. Okay, so that's all there, they're all down, and I'm just going to go ahead and ahead of time I'm just going to put a compressor that I'm going to like on that. So I'm going to go for the CLA 1176. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that it's set to the bluey, which is the more aggressive of the two. And from here, I'm also going to solo safe all my auxes so that when I solo an individual instrument, I still hear it. So if I don't do that, let's just have a listen. Notice how everything cuts out, and that's because these individual channels are actually routing to these auxes, and it's not getting through those auxes because they're not soloed as well. So for instance, if I was to take this rhythm here, solo the guitars, okay, and I'm still not going to hear that because the main mix isn't solo safed as well. So if I solo safe this, now I'm hearing that guitar. So that's showing you that I need to make sure all of these auxes are also solo safed. Another word for solo safed is called solo isolated, meaning that these channels, these auxes, can't be soloed. It always lets signal through them. Okay, that looks like it's done, and let's just double check. Great. So we've got that basic routing set up, and now what I want to do is handle a few of the things that I think need a lot of work. And I generally like to work with a fairly top-down approach, meaning that I like to start with the overall mix bus and work backwards with my processing. But in this case, I think that there's just a few subtractive EQ cuts that I could do to the guitars and a few of the other instruments just to clean it out a little bit more before I get started with that. So, and then particularly these rhythms were upsetting me a little bit. So that one for me is just a little bit muddy, so I'm just going to add an EQ here. Okay, great. And I'm feeling like it's going to be somewhere between this kind of 200 to 500 range. If I clear that out, I'm going to start to feel things open up. Okay, so it's much closer to the higher end of that range I was talking about, near the 400-500. But notice if I take this in and out, you'll suddenly start hearing that kind of windy sound kind of go away a little bit. And I might actually be able to put some energy back in a little bit higher than that so that you still hear them a bit, because I feel like they've dropped back in the mix quite a bit. So what we've really done there is kind of reassess the energy there and kind of replaced it from that kind of windy mid-range area to a little bit more of a punchy upper mid region. Okay, let's just listen to the others and see if they're going to need the same sort of thing. Now that might be just a little bit lower, and because these are kind of different parts, I'm going to not just copy that over, I'm going to kind of do each one individually. And you may have noticed that I like to leave other instruments playing while I'm doing this sort of thing. I very, very rarely leave one instrument in solo the whole time, because I find that that gives you an unfair representation of what the rest of the song is doing. Okay, and you can try and perfect one thing, and when you put it back in, it just really doesn't work with everything else. And let's just put those rhythms together and turn on and off this processing. Okay, so that's feeling a bit better, and notice that I felt like there was some kind of lower end energy in this one compared to the first one. So let's just add this third kind of rhythm part and see what that's doing. So I'm going to kind of leave that as it is at the moment. I might find that that's just more of a padding part in the background, and I might even need to brighten that one up, but I'm going to kind of leave it till a little bit later, because I don't really feel like that's a main part of the song, and it's more atmospheric, and I want to kind of get more of the big players in first and get them kind of set right first. Okay, so I think the next thing to do is that the vocal really needs to dominate this track, and it's not doing so at the moment. So I think that it's time to kind of add a fair amount of compression to make sure that that's fighting up at the front of the mix.
Placing the stars, flotations with an open sky, reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side.
Okay, so that's bringing it forward quite a bit, and the aim of the LA2A is just to kind of bring consistency to the average level of the vocal. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an 1176, again the CLA 76, to just catch a couple of those big spikes.
Placing the stars, flotations with an open sky, reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs.
So for me, I want on those signs where he gets more powerful for that to just be compressing just a little bit. So I'm going to try and set the input here, and there's no kind of set threshold here. Well, no threshold to set here, and it's a fixed threshold. So I'm turning the input in to kind of hit the threshold right, and then I'm going to back the output down so that the volume isn't inconsistent.
Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side. Tattooed behind his eyes. She whispers to him, love, stay and be mine tonight.
So that's not really responding how I would like it to. So I'm going to try putting that before the 2A, so hopefully that there's some more spikes for it to kind of clamp down on.
Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side. Tattooed behind his eyes.
So in this case, I just prefer it with the LA2A just on it. I just don't really feel like it needs the 1176. If I feel it, like it just felt a little bit too grabby and like it was over compressed. And if at some point later on, just because everything else has been souped up, I might start to work on that. I might even add a bit of a cleaner brick wall limiter. But for now, let's just move on. I don't want to spend too long on one decision. I want to kind of get things in the ballpark and move on. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just look at the drums for a little while.
Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side. Tattooed behind.
So I kind of feel like the kick and the snare need quite a bit more top end in them. So I think we might kind of go for a basic channel strip here, and I really like the BX 4000E. So this is an SSL style channel strip, and so let's just start with the snare, and we're just going to throw an absolute ton of top end in and see if that actually makes it feel a bit better.
Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side. Tattooed behind his eyes. Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side.
Okay, so that's helped a lot, but there's a kind of lower frequency in there that I'm not liking. So let's find this in the lower mid band and take a bit out. I'm going to set it to be quite sharp.
Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky.
So it's around there. Let's take a bit of that out.
Praising the stars, flotations with an open sky. Reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side. Tattooed behind his eyes.
Okay, so the mixture of that compression, a little bit of distortion, and this kind of drastic EQ has really helped. I'm going to kind of get rid of a little bit of the rumble with a high-pass filter here, and let's move on to the kick. Now, I'm not trying to make this snare sound like the finished product because I know that the samples are going to be quite important to this, but I just wanted to get the live snare to have a bit more character and a bit more weight so that it added a little bit more to the sound, okay? And let's do the same with the kick.
Placing the stars, flotations with an open sky, reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your side. Tattooed behind his eyes, she whispers to him, love, stay and be mine tonight. Falls into her knowing stare, saves him every time. The forever dreamers, forever dream. Placing the stars, flotations with an open sky, reconciling foolish pride, seeking timely signs. Come back down and walk with me, I'll be by your.
So again, I was taking out some of this boxiness. This time it was slightly higher, and I'm adding a bit of top end. I went for a kind of like lower knocky sound rather than a clickier high mid there, so that it kind of sounded a little bit more old school than a little bit more kind of alt rock or metal. But there's still quite a bit of top end in. And notice that I put a bit of compression on, but afterwards I went a little bit more extreme with the low end because the kick drum just got a little bit softer in the lows once it was being compressed a bit. And that's quite a common thing, is that you have to kind of readjust the low end once you compress a bit. So let's just kind of move on, and the next thing I want to do is kind of handle the cymbals. Now I'm feeling like it was quite washy and it needed to be a little bit more in your face. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of listen to all of the different cymbal parts and look at where I can improve that.
Placing the stars, selling and walk close.
So I like the character and the weight that's added from this kind of Coles overhead, and I don't think that needs much processing. But I find that these two kind of main overheads are just a little bit spiky. So I think just a little bit of compression and a little bit of EQ is really going to help them come forward. So I'm going to do the same thing again. So we've got the SSL channel strip here, and let's just EQ it a bit. And to get a little bit more compression out of this, I think that we're going to have to just turn up the clip gain level so it can hit harder into it, and therefore we get more compression, and then we can pull it back on the volume fader. Like that seems way bigger and a little bit more consistent as well. I'm going to go ahead this time and kind of just try and copy this across and see if that kind of does what we need to do. So that feels like it's got way more energy and it feels like it's way more forward. You may notice as well is that this compressor here is really clamping down quite heavily on the snare drum, and what that's going to do is bring up the rest of the noise floor, and it's bringing out all of those cymbals, and the overheads don't sound like they're another snare mic now. They sound like proper overheads. So kind of let's put that back in with the kick and the snare, and let's just see how those things are kind of starting to fit together. So that's feeling pretty good. I feel like at some point a little bit later on that we're going to want to take some harsh resonances or harsher resonances from those overheads, but again, I'm leaving some room for maneuver and to see what it sounds like when we get more stuff in. So I'm going to add this Coles overhead now and just see how much weight that's adding. Let's try and kind of compress that again with the SSL. And let's add just a touch more mid-range to that. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm kind of almost doing the inverse of what I'm doing on the conventional overheads. And the reason is that what I can do now is I can kind of balance in the amount of this weight of the kick and the snare I'm getting from just this one rather than doing it from the main overhead. So let's just go ahead and put these close mics back in, and I'm just going to blend this up, and what I'm going to be doing is bringing it up until it becomes too much and backing it back down. So that just gives it a little bit more solidarity there, and it just kind of gels everything together. So let's go ahead and put these rooms in and see how we're feeling. So there's a couple of weird kind of frequencies in there that I want to kind of get rid of, like this kind of mid-range resonance that's going on, and just there's this boxy thing in the low as well. So that's not really getting it, so I'm going to go for something a little bit more surgical. So that's that sort of area at 1K that I was looking for. Let's make that kind of narrow. And that's brought out this kind of area even more. And that's feeling better, but there's kind of some rumble in there. I'm hearing the kind of low sub of the bass. So I don't know this for certain, but it sounds like the bass was actually recorded in the same room at the same time. Okay, so you lose something from the bottom end there and the overall warmth, but I think that we're going to get that from what we've got in the overheads, that coals and the natural kick. So I'm not so worried about that. So let's kind of put that back in and let's see how we're feeling. And let's bring this mono room up in level a little bit, okay, so that it's more balanced with everything else. And I'm not sure we need all of this top end in the room either. I think it's just kind of getting in the way and getting a bit washy, and it's taking away from what the overheads are adding there. Let's go to a bit where that was kind of strong in the chorus. So now we're kind of using it just for mid-range energy, and I think that if we're doing that, we can go ahead and we can kind of smash that harder with compression. So let's go to our trusty 1176 again, and let's just try hitting that quite hard. I'm going to set it to kind of all buttons in, so this is a mode as if you'd have pressed all the 4 ratio buttons in, and it's going to kind of smash this quite hard. So you can actually really start to hear the bass there, so that was definitely tracked at the same time. But to me, that might actually add a sense of cohesion. It's not so much of a problem. And just because we've filtered this mono room down to be a little bit more like a mid-range energy mic, I think that this is going to blend quite well with the overheads. So let's just give that a test. So it's kind of just giving all of that energy in the mid-range. Let's just put the kick and the snare back in. Okay, so the drums are starting to sound a lot better. So I think at this point we can just go ahead and add something to the overall drum bus just to kind of get things to be just even, like grittier and bigger still. So I'm going to add a couple of plugins. I'm going to add some sort of distortion and then add some sort of bus compression. Okay, so I'm liking that quite a bit. So let's go ahead and add some sort of SSL bus compressor here. Okay, so that's feeling much better overall. I actually don't really feel like we need much hat and ride at the moment, so I'm going to kind of put those down. I'm not going to bother with this other room mic in for the moment. I'm going to see if I need that a little bit later on because I'm feeling quite happy with the way it's sitting. But I do feel like we could get more front end of the kick and the snare, and I think that we can get that now from the samples. So let's just add those in, and I'm going to start with the snare, and I'm going to start with this dry. And let's add more top to that as well. So one of the great things about actually adding top to the sample rather than just putting it all on the natural drum is that you don't have any of the spill, so you get less hi-hat bleed in the top end of this, and it might actually add some snappiness, okay, and it will help differentiate it and make it cut through the cymbals. And now let's put the wet one in. I love the sound of the quality of that room. So let's just go ahead, and I just want to take out a couple of frequencies that are kind of getting in the way a little bit with this really high. And if I can make this kind of feel a little bit more natural rather than just plastering a sample on top of the natural kit, that will feel good. Like as if this could be a completely real reverb of the space. Okay, great. And I'm just going to now add this kick sample in. But notice that I actually haven't done any gating to the drums. And that's because I kind of wanted this to be a little bit washier. I wanted it to be a little bit more like a real kit. And if I'd have gone too tight, it would have ended up taking it down a little bit more of an alt rock direction. And whilst I wanted to kind of make the drums a little bit more bottom heavy and a little bit more modern, I didn't want to take them down that super punchy, super big route where I feel like it's unrealistic. So I still want it to sound like a real drum kit. And I just think that by not gating these kicks and snares so heavily, we're getting a bit of that. And again, let's just obliterate the top end of that. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good. Let's just go ahead and put the bass in with that. Let's take it to a chorus. Okay, so I'm getting a weird kind of relationship between the DI and the mic, and I just want to check that these are kind of a little bit more phase coherent. So I'm going to try an automatic tool called Auto Align, and I'm just going to set the DI as the source and the mic as the receiver, because the DI is likely to get into the interface or preamp or whatever you're using quicker than the mic will, because it hasn't had to go through the amplifier and then through the speaker, picked up by a microphone and in. It's just kind of direct. So by doing so, I'm going to hit detect now, and hopefully this should align them. So you can really hear there that phase relationship was really nasty. And by fixing that, we've just kind of got a better sound and a much louder sound straight away. So I might even need to turn this bass mic down a little bit now. And now that we've got this going, I feel like the DI can just be a lot nastier, and I can kind of use that just as a special effect. And let's back off the low end a little bit so it's a bit less farty. so let's just EQ all of this together. And what you may have noticed is that I'm not trying to EQ really heavily all of these individual parts. I try and do it on the buses wherever possible, on stuff like basses on, and if I've not summed down individual guitar mics yet, I'd usually do that to the aux, EQ and process there rather than individual parts. I just feel like the phase relationship is better there. I get less kind of destructive results, and it kind of just feels a little bit more natural. So let's just add an EQ here. So I'm readdressing the energy a bit. I'm taking out a bit of this 150, putting something a bit lower. And I think that this means now I can go even more with the low end of the kick. So I'm kind of adding that frequency that I usually like to take out the kick drum quite a bit, that kind of 200, but I'm doing it ever so slightly, so only 1.8 dB, and it's on the sample rather than the live kick, so it's just adding a little bit of that weight that in that area that I was kind of competing with on the bass guitar, so that's kind of allowing them to sit better. So let's just go ahead and let's add those rhythm guitars back in now and just kind of get these balanced nicely, because now we've got everything else seeming bigger, we might actually be able to make these sound fuller. I actually think that we can scoop those in that area even more. And I think that by the time we kind of have some of these leads that are filling in this sort of frequency area, I think it'll be all right. And I think that we could make these even wetter. And now let's just go ahead and just smash these with a bit of distortion, or more namely, I'm going to try a distortion that's actually a heavy compressor. So this is an emulation of the Shaw Level Lock. So this is made by Sound Toys. So it's called Devil Lock. And this can be quite heavy-handed, and it doesn't have like an output trim. So I usually add a trim plugin after, but let's just have a listen. Okay, so that's starting to feel bigger, like it's got way, way, way more energy. But I feel like the cymbals are kind of annoying me a little bit with some of those harshy, like kind of whistly kind of frequencies. And there's a kind of magic plugin I use called Soothe for this. So this is like an automatic dynamic EQ that does lots and lots of bands of dynamic EQ automatically to kind of get rid of a lot of these whistles and resonances. So let's just load that up. Okay, so that's feeling better, but I'm just feeling like I'm maybe hitting the compressors a little bit too hard because I'm kind of hearing a bit of distortion in these overheads, and that's kind of bringing out that even more. Okay, so let's put that back in. Okay, so I'm kind of just massaging things into place a little bit more now we've got more in. So I wanted to get rid of some of that harshness from the cymbals. I tried experimenting with a few kind of cuts and boosts on the overall drum bus, so I settled on kind of just a little bit of a bump at around 65, which will bring out the kick and the low end energy a little bit, and a bit of a duck at about 2.5K, so that's kind of the harsh area. I was trying to put something a little bit higher, and I felt like that was beneficial to the cymbals but nothing else, so I went ahead and added that just on the two cymbals. Okay, so now I'm kind of feeling like it's good, but the guitars are really big, and I want the drums to be just as big, and there are a couple of things that are stopping that. So one is overall ambience, and the other is the fact that we could parallel process. Okay, so let's just go ahead, and I'm going to put the parallel in, and I'm going to put this on the snare to begin with, and I want to kind of make this sound huge. bringing it forward, but I also want to bring out the reverb, so I'm going to just throw some of that on the sample that's wet. And let's put that on the kick. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good to me. However, the kick and the snare and the bass are kind of unsettled from each other now, and I'm just thinking making a bit of a parallel blend with just the bass DI might help too. Okay, so that's really starting to hold some weight now, and I'm almost getting to the point where I could kind of add some reverbs. So let's just go ahead and let's get these lead guitars in. So we've kind of got the base of the track in, and then we're going to start making things a little bit wetter, a bit wider. So that lead actually sounds really good to me, those kind of power chordy things. And I don't want to do too much to it, because one of the hardest things to do when you're mixing is to not do a lot. And if something's already good, don't ruin it. But I'm just hearing a low frequency I want to get out of it to just open everything up. But other than that, I'm not going to do a lot. And it's right down there about, 80 hertz or so. And that's just kind of occasionally woofing a little bit, and that's just getting in the way. And now let's add some of the others. Okay, and that sounds nice too. It's suffering from just a little bit too much low mid somewhere. So let's just get that out the way so it will open up out the rest of the track. And this sort of stuff is really primed to actually add a lot of effects and, like big ethereal reverbs too. But we're going to do that a little bit later. So again, I'm readdressing the balance a little bit, taking out some of this kind of muddy body and adding a little bit of the bite. And what that's going to do is pull that guitar part forward and help them compete with everything else that's been souped up already. And let's just throw in this ambience. Okay, so that's adding a little bit of space behind that one. And again, I just don't think we need so much of the low end energy in this. And I think that we can leave the low end in the closer one and actually just high pass filter this a bit to get rid of some of the rumble. And this is going to be something that could be spread and further enhanced and widened to kind of get this shimmery feel. Let's add this lead riff and just see what that's doing. And then what we've really done now is kind of got the main players involved, the main kind of core rhythms and the main parts of the band. And we haven't done a lot with effects, but we've kind of got everything sitting a little bit better. Okay, so this is a point where I think would actually be quite good to visit the rough to work out how prominent this kind of lead riff needs to be, because I've got a funny feeling that even though it's titled lead riff, that it might actually be like a spread ambient thing. Yeah, and I think that can kind of be buried a little bit as well. So let's just get rid of some mid-range out of that. Okay, great. So let's just add some of this tambourine and shaker and other percussion. And I really feel like I should start with the tambourine because, you know, that's kind of got this like weightier feel about it, and it's going to just emphasize the kind of hi-hat pattern probably. So let's just have a listen. So I kind of want this to be like an invisible production effect where you take it away and you miss it, but you don't really know it's there. So I'm trying to just take out frequencies, like this lower stuff isn't really contributing anything, and I was trying to find a frequency where that was poking through the mix a little bit more and duck that so that it kind of blended into the track a little bit more. Let's just add the shakers now. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good. The occasional snare is jumping through quite heavily, so I'm just going to kind of give a little bit more compression to that, help hold it a bit firmer. And that's really helped with the consistency, so I'm just going to drag that across to the kick and just see if the same sort of settings even those two bits out. Okay, so that's all holding just a lot firmer now. It's quite dry still, but everything feels like it's got a solid foundation to be working off. So let's just go ahead and add the lead vocals and just make sure that they're still sitting on top, which they probably aren't. So I think now we'll be able to hit the compressor harder. Okay, so at the moment the double tracking is going through the same compressor and it's kind of dragging that all down. So I'm actually just going to send the double track there straight to the mix, and I'll maybe just compress that individually, but I don't want the lead vocal to get really mushy in the chorus and actually not compress very hard in the verse. So that's why I'm kind of splitting them off.
Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not
Okay, so I'm going to try and make it just that touch warmer by hitting it into a brick wall limiter before it hits into the 2A.
Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me.
And I think that now we've got all of this compression going on, we're just getting some of the essiness. So I'm just going to throw on a stock Pro Tools de-esser and just get rid of a little bit of that sibilant sound.
Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars.
And now when I was hitting that harder, I didn't like it so much, so I'm like softening it, and I'm now going to add a different de-esser on the end of the chain just to kind of soften it once more, and doing it in a couple of different stages should sound a bit smoother than obliterating it before it goes through the compressors.
Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those scars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty.
Okay, so that's feeling pretty good now. It's like sitting on top of the mix, and we're just getting a little bit of that energy from the double tracks as well. Let's just go ahead and start adding the rest of the vocals in. I'm not going to work too hard on them because I really want to be in this position here towards the end to make them kind of like really open out. So I kind of want to leave a little bit in the tank for that.
I belong with you. I
Okay, so I'm going to go for the CLA vocals here. It's just a really great out of the can to get these kind of big epic vocals with minimal effort. Okay, so I really like the tighter ambiences here. I don't want it to just get too wet at the moment, but it's just adding a lot of character to it and a lot of width. Let's just go ahead and copy that to the other woes and just see how we feel. And I want to make these R's quite a bit brighter. I know that they're kind of lower pitch, but I want to kind of bring out the airiness in them. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to look for a pull tech. Again, I'm just readdressing the energy there. I want all these backing vocals to be about that bright energy, not like a dull like wall of sound, because we have so many guitars and bass and everything just kind of filling that range energy. So let's just listen to that one more time, and I'm just going to turn off these processors on the backing vocals so you can kind of hear what it's doing. So it's just a lot more epic, it's got a bit more character, and we could probably play around with bigger effects as well, but I don't want to put these on the insert. I want to kind of like add some sends for that. So let's just put the vocal back in and let's just see how those backing vocals balance with the lead vocal. And again, I'm not putting the rest of the track in yet. I just want to kind of get these, and it's like I've got these areas under the microscope, and then I'm going to like put it back out, and hopefully the balance should feel good. So I really like how these woes are sounding and the lead vocal, but I'm not so keen on the the R's because they're just not cutting through enough. So I think that if I put this L2 on those, I should be able to bring them out. add these pre-harmonies in. Let's see what they're doing here. In fact, they're only earlier on in the song, so let's have a listen.
She tattooed behind his eyes a smoother sound. He hears it as it's coming round. Maroon beneath the sky. Tattooed behind his eyes.
So again, they're kind of a rich harmony just to give some extra volume, some extra width. So I'm going to try copying these across and see if they work. Just to get this kind of whistly, airy thing.
She tattooed behind his eyes a smoother sound. He hears it as it's coming round. Maroon beneath the sky. Tattooed behind his eyes.
And I think that we can get rid of some mid-range in those.
Behind his eyes a smoother sound. He hears it as it's coming round. Maroon beneath the sky. Tattooed behind his eyes.
And you know, this one needs to kind of gel with the leads a little bit more than the R's. So I'm just going to add some mid-range and just see if I can get them to kind of slightly fight with each other, just enough so that it feels like a legitimate harmony rather than this kind of airy backing vocal.
She tattooed behind his eyes a smoother sound. He hears it as it's coming round. Maroon beneath the sky. Tattooed behind his eyes. Share with me this beauty in those stars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. Share with me this beauty in those stars. We're not from here, but I belong with you. She tattooed behind his eyes.
Okay, so that's starting to feel pretty good. And remember, everything's dry at the moment. There's no kind of ambience on there. So I'm kind of pleased with how that's coming across. And I think it's time for a quick ear break. And then I'm just going to add some kind of mix bus processing. And quite often I'm adding mix bus processing a little bit earlier than this and kind of mixing into it. But I'm very careful when I'm mixing to kind of go on the vibe a little bit. And because things have been kind of distorted a little bit already and kind of gelled together, I didn't really feel such a pressing need to go ahead and do that. So let's take an ear break, and when we come back, I'm going to get on with some mix bus processing.